Yo, what's up guys, it's your boy Sami here. Today we are gonna see, what if Naruto becomes the rogue ninja, part 1. Hope you'll enjoy this video. So before we start, please subscribe to our channel, and like this video. So let's get into the video. Multitudes of green leaves rustled together, and skinny brown twigs split in two, as Naruto furiously shoved aside a network of green branches, forcing his way through the brush. Every branch shoved aside forged a path forward, and, as he neared the end of the brush, a beam of light illuminated the right side of his face. There was the light at the end of the tunnel. The web of branches at the end of the brush split with a final shove, and out rolled Naruto, who unfortunately took a face full of dirt, instead of sticking the landing. The momentum of his legs almost sent him into a flip, but they hovered above him for a moment before crashing back into the ground. A groan of pain echoed from his lips, as he sputtered out a mouthful of dirt, and shakily rose to his feet, casting a weary glance behind him. Different green trees and shrubbery were the only things that fell on his eyes, a very good thing considering how persistent the ninja following him was. Maybe he'd lost them. His chest rose and fell as the exhaustion of the fight started to take its toll. Adrenaline had been his friend at the start of this encounter, but now it was wearing off. "That's my luck," he said, breathing raggedly. "Fighting some weird ninja in the middle of the forest." "That weird ninja," Kurama emphasized, "is currently responsible for those gashes across your upper body." "Yeah," Naruto said, grimacing, as he examined the deep gashes lining his upper body. The ragged wounds were oozing blood at an alarming rate, and it was now to the point where the upper portion of his outfit was soaked in blood, and looked more red than orange. Groaning, he tore his eyes away, looking to the forest to try to calm his mind. It didn't work though. It only fueled his dread. He still hadn't caught a glimpse of who was chasing him, and looking into the mix of greens and browns while standing in eerie silence was beyond unnerving. Finally, he shut his eyes, taking a breath. His voice came out silent and shakier than intended. "Think he's the guy Mayumi was talking about?" Kurama paused, an uneasy silence passing between the two. "I don't know," he replied silently. "But whoever he is, he's resourceful." "Yeah, what gave it away?" "The giant hawk or the rabbit dog. Do call you want, but he's obviously skilled. And if he's who we think he is, it's even worse than that." "Yeah, definitely worse," Naruto breathed, lips barely moving, as he nearly fell out of consciousness. The pain was pulsating from every gash, and it was getting to be unbearable. The only thing that seemed to help was when he shut his eyes. He would give the world right now if it meant just a few minutes of sleep, but instead, he was greeted with shivers. His body felt like an uncontrollable mess of nerves, and it didn't take long to realize that fighting the shivers was no use. He was going into shock. Within seconds, his breathing rate had increased, and every breath felt like it was being pulled through a filter of very dirty, and clogged one at that. "You alright?" the fox asked. "What?" Naruto said, straightening up to gather what little strength he had left. "Are you getting sleepy?" "Well, at least you've still got your sense of humor." Naruto chuckled, then steeled himself, pulling up both fists, and taking a deep breath. After he had recollected himself, he said, "If we've got someone this powerful on our tail, then we're almost in the clear. We've just gotta keep pushing." "Alright, kid. Let's see if you've got what it takes." "You better believe it," Naruto replied, turning his attention to the forest ahead. With a squint, he eyed the closest tree, and leaped up to the nearest branch. No fear. No pain. No tears. Just a will to press on, and the knowledge that it would be worth it in the end. Naruto Uzumaki wasn't always a rogue. Like everyone, he was once a child, and like any child, he had hopes, dreams, and aspirations. But the world he grew up in was unkind to him. Years of abuse and neglect were heaped onto his shoulders, and, over time, he came to accept that the way people treated him was a burden he had no choice but to carry. Sometimes, the thought of being a runaway would cross his mind, but these thoughts were usually pushed into the recesses of his mind, as foolish. Where would he go? Konoha was his home. It was all he knew, and it was probably all he would ever know. Still, the thought never quite made its way out of that thick skull of his. He could never forget the first time that thought crossed his mind. It was on his first day at the academy. Dull kunai blades clanged against each other, as a group of schoolboys played outside during lunch break. They all looked to be in some faraway land. Carefree. Unburdened. Joyful. All Naruto could do was look on with blue eyes sparkling in wonder. The genuine laughter tickled his ears, as the children traded blows, and hurled fierce battle cries at each other. It was a kid's paradise in every sense of the word. Naruto let out a deep breath, then left his place on the swing, and started his sprint towards the spirited playground. His kunai was already firmly lodged under his fingers, and a determined smile could be seen on his lips, as he launched himself into the middle of the playful skirmish. His eyes brimmed with excitement, as he landed in front of one of the schoolboys, and energetically dropped into his battle stance. Time seemed to slow to a halt, as Naruto waited for the boy to respond, but it didn't take long for him to realize that he was waiting in vain. The boy never responded, and, as Naruto looked around, he noticed that it wasn't only the boy in front of him. All around, the joyful sounds surrounding the lively playground had died down, and, one by one, the other boys had turned to look at him. Some of them looked at him like he was a rain cloud on a sunny day, and others settled for an uncomfortable glance in his direction. The grin Naruto had been wearing slowly faded, as he noticed he was now the only one in a fighting stance. If the rejection and shame showing on everyone's faces didn't kill him, the nasty stares they sent his way would do the job. His eyes landed on a skinny kid with spiky red hair who was now walking towards him. He could hear the words on his tongue before they left his lips. Get lost. But why can't I play? Naruto asked, a stubborn pout crossing his face. Loser. A random voice called out. The spiky red-haired kid sighed then said, sorry. Real ninjas only. But I am a real ninja. We're both in the academy, remember? Getting into the academy doesn't make you a real ninja. Then what does? The spiky-haired kid used his index finger to scratch the side of his cheek, as he thought about it. Well, he said, looking down on Naruto. Real ninjas have to be a certain height. Yeah, that's it. You're too short. What? Naruto yelled. But what about that kid? He said, pointing an accusing finger at one of the boys. He's chubby, and about a foot shorter than me. Oh, the spiky-haired kid replied, examining the boy who had been accused. After a moment of thinking, he lifted a spiny finger pointed towards the tallest boy in the group, and said, well, his brother is tall enough for both of them. Now get out of here. Naruto gritted his teeth, and balled his fists until his knuckles were white. What a lame excuse. The worst part was that there was nothing he could do about it. By now, he knew that this was just how things were. He stared down the spiky-haired kid for a while, then shoved his hands into his pockets, and walked away. He left with a lot of anger showing on his face, and even more of it hidden in his heart. But, as angry as he was, he didn't throw a tantrum, neither did he cry. Doing any of those things would just make them think they were getting to him, and that was something he would never let them see. So, no matter how much he hurt on the inside, he promised himself one thing: he would take it. Shikamaru was leaning against the wall of the academy with both arms crossed, and couldn't tear his lazy eyes from the spectacle. Nara's sharp eyes lingered on Naruto until he had made his way back to the swing. After a while, Shikamaru turned his attention back to a shogi piece he had been fidgeting between his fingers. A sigh escaped his lips as he spoke to his white-bodied companion. They couldn't even give him a break on the first day of school. Choji was leaning against the wall just a few inches away with one hand halfway down a chip bag. The solemn look on his face revealed that he didn't know what to say. In the end, he simply whispered, no, it doesn't look like it. Sakura's eyes were usually a vibrant green, but their usual brightness faded as she watched the ordeal from under the shade of the academy building. Do you know? She asked, staring sadly at the scene. Know what? Replied a curious Ino. What makes people hate him so much? Ino cast a glance towards Naruto, then gave a disheartened shrug, and softly said, no. As Naruto sat on the swing, a silent thought fell on his ears. A glance behind him revealed the stoic form of Sasuke Uchiha, darkened by the shade of the tree. Naruto only knew who he was because everyone had to introduce themselves on the first day of class, but it was already obvious that he was one of those serious types. The two stared at each other for a bit longer, then Naruto crossed his arms. Well, what are you looking at? He half yelled. Sasuke's hands fell into his pockets as he turned and started walking away. His footsteps faded into the background, but before he fell out of earshot, Naruto heard him mutter 3 words. Grow up, loser. Naruto watched Sasuke's retreating form for a moment before lowering his eyes and returning to his original position on the swing. Jerk, he mumbled, wiping away a sniffle with his forearm. Later that day, Naruto found himself sitting at one of the stools of Ichiraku Ramen, with a piping hot bowl of ramen steaming in front of him. The thin chopsticks twirled in his fingers as he slowly stirred the meal. He assumed it was obvious he was having a bad day because Tucci told him his bowl was in the house, and Am added an extra helping of pork to the bowl. There was no doubt that the kind gesture had brightened up his day, but it wasn't enough to shake earlier events from his mind. Ichiraku's had turned into a place of comfort for him over the years, but the sight of empty seats every time he came to eat just reminded him that he didn't really have anybody. There were a few days here and there when Ruka would treat him to a few bowls, but the gloomy days when he had to eat alone far outweighed the brighter days. He wanted more. Maybe that was selfish of him, or maybe it was normal. Whatever it was, that was the first time he felt it. What if he ran away? Naruto sat on the familiar playground swing rocking back and forth as he looked on at the other kids enjoying themselves a few dozen feet away. The swing felt the same way it always felt. The wooden base was uncomfortable and hard, and the brown ropes holding it up were rough enough to call out your hands if you gripped too hard, but worst of all, the seat was lonely. He always sat there watching all the other kids play, but no matter what he did, there was always some reason to leave him out. It had been 2 years since Connie made up that stupid height requirement rule, but now that Naruto had grown a few inches taller, Connie told him that he also needed to be skilled enough to beat him in sparring. No one else had to beat Connie in a fight to be a part of the group, but Naruto did. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but he accepted it. He promised himself that he would beat that jerk one day and earn his place with everyone else. Today would be that day. He had failed in the past, but after a few months of training, he was sure he could do it. The wooden swing lurched in the opposite direction as Naruto jumped to his feet and marched up to where the other kids were playing. He squatted down into his usual fighting stance with his kunai in hand, digging his foot into the dirt to secure his footing. Connie sighed, then gave Naruto an almost sad look while spinning his kunai into his hand, as usual. The playground was already starting to fill with cheers from most of the other kids, and before long, a small circle of cheering children had formed around the two. Put him in his place, Connie. Yeah, get him. Naruto and Connie were now both in their fighting stances, and carefully eyeing each other from opposite edges of the circle. Each of the fighters had one hand firmly gripping a kunai just inches from their bodies, and their steps were barely audible as they slowly stalked the edge of the makeshift arena. Naruto eyed his opponent, then let out a steadying breath to slow his breathing. For some reason, the air felt stuffy now, and it was harder to breathe. It was a familiar feeling. Maybe there was more dust in the air than usual. He forced himself to focus, and block out all of the cheers until they faded into the background. The only sound he heard now was that of his own heartbeat. It was a steady 2-beat thumping sound. It grew louder with each passing second. Messy red hair blitzed towards Naruto, and his grip on his kunai tightened. A streak of silver was all Naruto saw, as Connie's kunai came dangerously close to tearing right through his chest. He slid his right foot against the dirt just in time to lean back and avoid the blow, but Connie's onslaught continued. The kunai spun around in Connie's hand as he tried jabbing at Naruto from above, below, and every angle in between. Defensive blocks and side steps were all Naruto had to offer. Every swipe, blow, or kick from Connie was so aggressive that Naruto couldn't find a spot to land a single blow of his own. In past attempts, he had tried waiting for an opening, but that method had proved unfruitful. It was infuriating. What he needed was to find some way to land a punch, despite Connie's onslaught. He waited until Connie launched a one-legged kick, then rushed forward trying to force a hit, but the only thing he felt on the end of his elbow was a cool breeze. All of that energy had connected with absolutely nothing. As his elbow flew towards empty space, he realized his mistake and tried to recover, but it was too late. That single moment was all Connie needed to disarm him, and, without even realizing how it happened, Naruto found himself slammed to the ground with the cool blade of a kunai pressed against his neck. As the cold dirt rubbed against his face, he found himself struggling under the weight of Connie's knee. It was no use, and the position his body was in confirmed what his mind already knew: he was beaten. The violent writhing under Connie's knee slowed to a stop, and Naruto shut his eyes, letting his body fall slack. Connie spun his kunai into his pouch, then lifted his knee from Naruto's back as he rose to his feet. Cheers once again echoed from the crowd of children, and a few insults were mingled in for good measure. The taunts fell on deaf ears. Naruto had heard all the insults before, and tuning people out was a well-developed skill of his. As he started pushing off the ground to get up, he felt a hand grab under his shoulder to help him up. "Leave him alone," Connie said, helping Naruto off the ground. "He might be a loser," Connie paused, taking a moment to brush some of the dust from Naruto's orange tracksuit, then said, "but he's a determined one." The baffled Naruto cast his gaze to Connie, and saw that there was no hint of teasing on his face. He meant exactly what he had said. A determined loser. Volleys of insults had assaulted Naruto's ears before, but never before had someone actually complimented him. To be honest, it wasn't even a full compliment, but did that really matter? Naruto spent the rest of the day trying to figure out the answer to that question. In the end, he concluded that it didn't. Being a determined loser was better than being a flat-out loser any day, so he was going to take this small mercy and hold on to it as tightly as he could. That year at the academy, Naruto finally started to feel like he fit in somewhat. Before that year had ended, he had a small circle of people he could call friends. They included people like Shikamaru Nar, Choji Akimichi, and another boy named Kiba Inizuka. With time, a few more kids warmed up to him, although most remained somewhat hostile. Most of those who associated with him affectionately called him the funny loser. Considering how people had treated him before, he couldn't complain. Being a funny loser was an improvement. By his final year, he had graduated from funny loser to class clown. The variety of pranks he pulled not only got him the acknowledgement he desired, but also resulted in the complete removal of the loser moniker he seemed to be stuck with. If he was honest, he didn't quite like the title of class clown, but it didn't have loser attached to it, so he couldn't complain. As graduation time neared, Naruto couldn't help but feel like there was some distance forming between him and the academy. The classrooms started to feel like part of an eternal that he couldn't escape. Everything was the same. Teachers gripped chalk to scribble lessons on boards and expected children to follow along, take notes, and learn. Groups of kids formed mini-tribes, while others, like Sasuke, kept to themselves. To put it short, every day consisted of going to the same stuffy classrooms, seeing the same familiar, and sometimes hostile, faces, and living the same drab life. He couldn't wait for the day when he became a genin. That day seemed to come at a snail's pace, but he strengthened his mind and endured. The hope that life, as a genin, could offer more than what he currently had was what kept him going. What he could not have known was how becoming a member of Team 7 would impact him. At first, he hated a lot of things about his team. His sensei, Kakashi, was a smut lover who suffered from a serious case of chronic lateness, and his male teammate, Sasuke, could be described in 3 words: dark moody bastard. The only redeeming quality was the fact that the third member of their team was Sakura, the pink-haired girl he had a crush on. Unfortunately, even she was tainted due to having taken a liking to the Uchiha. Initially, the team suffered from obvious incompatibility issues, but the various missions they embarked on strengthened their bond as a team. They fought together, watched each other's backs, and cared for each other. Eventually, Naruto realized that he had found something. Whatever it was, he had never felt it before, but he knew it was special. True, they all had their differences, but even with those differences, they were still able to come together to work towards a common goal. As time passed, he realized that being a member of Team 7 was probably what it felt like to have a family. He wasn't sure since he had never had a family of his own, but he imagined that this was what having a family would be like. Without even looking for it, a lot of the things he had been wishing for fell into his lap, but the same experiences that brought the team together started to push them apart. Egos and agendas entered the equation, further complicating things, and before long, Naruto found himself learning lessons he didn't know existed. The hardest lesson he learned was that nothing lasts forever, and his hospital fight with Sasuke marked the beginning of the end. Today was one of those perfect days that only comes on rare occasions. Those days where the sun rises to a place high in the sky, thin cirrus clouds litter the atmosphere, and the serene skyscape is topped off by a cool breeze that sends the trees into a gentle sway. A small group of birds flying in V formation only added to the peaceful setting as they slowly flapped their way through the sky. Watching the steady flapping of their wings was relaxing. At least, as relaxing as possible with the state of mind Naruto was currently in. How could such a beautiful day go so wrong? He struggled to make sense of it. What was meant to be a simple visit to a friend in the hospital had turned into an all-out brawl on the hospital rooftops. It was no secret that he and Sasuke didn't exactly get along, but what happened on that hospital rooftop was still a shock to him. He had conjured up this image of his perfect family with Team 7, but it was all falling apart before his eyes. Looking back, he supposed that he could see it coming. The truth was he didn't want to. He wanted this to be the perfect family he never had, but it wasn't. Denying that was the same as denying reality. To top it all off, Sakura almost got caught in the middle of their little scuffle. Fortunately, Kakashi was there to stop the two before any serious damage could be done, at least physically. No one had arrived soon enough to stop the emotional damage. And so, Naruto was left to walk the rooftops of Konoha, alone, as usual. One foot crossed in front of the other in what felt like an unending loop. 1 step, 2 step, 3 step. The only differences came when there was an obstacle in the way. The foot would lift slightly higher to step over a pipe, or the two would work in tandem to balance on a thin beam-like structure, and every now and then, one would kick out violently at a random piece of trash, sending it careening into the village below, with a barely audible thud. He used one arm to vault off the rooftop he had been walking on, then dropped down onto a not-so-crowded alleyway, as silent as a mouse. The wind rushed against his whiskers as he fell to the ground. It was a feeling that would normally be exhilarating, but not today. As his feet fell back into a steady rhythm, he noticed Jiraiya standing on the side of the road. Naruto didn't slow his movements, but at that moment, there was a part of him that was hopeful. For what, he wasn't quite sure. But when Jiraiya kept silent, as he walked by, he knew he hadn't found it. As his trek through the alleyways of Konoha continued, he eventually stumbled onto Sakura leaning against a wall. Her usually bright features had dimmed considerably, and her slim arms wrapped her body uncomfortably. The guilt gnawing at his conscience was his first indication that he couldn't leave things the way they were. When he was a few feet away, he simply settled for saying her name. Sakura-chan. She glanced at him while keeping her head bowed, and silently said, "There's something I need to tell you. We'll make it a date, so walk with me for a bit." The quick lurch in Naruto's movements was more than enough to convey his confusion. Sakura-chan wanted to go on a date with him. But why now? She'd never seriously considered the idea before. "You coming?" Sakura called over her shoulder, her thin frame already a couple of steps ahead. Her question was answered when she heard the pit-pat of Naruto's sandals jogging up to her side. A scaly tan-colored lizard scurried away, its color nearly matching the dirt road it had come from. Naruto watched as it ran into a small hole under one of the food shops lining the streets, then peeked its head back out to observe the surroundings. After walking in awkward silence for a bit longer, Naruto decided he should be the first to speak. "I should apologize." His tone was serious, not anything like his usual joking demeanor. He waited for a reply, but heard nothing except food stand workers sharpening their knives in the background. It didn't take long for him to notice that Sakura was staring at the ground blankly, clearly in a world of her own. "Sakura-chan." Sakura was knocked out of her trance, and finally lifted her head to turn to him. "Oh, sorry," she said while shaking her head. "Guess I spaced out." "It's okay," he replied, turning away. "I don't blame you with everything that happened today. That's actually what I was gonna talk to you about." "It's alright, Naruto," she replied, both hands now meekly folded over her stomach. "There's nothing okay about what happened today, Sakura-chan. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I know when I told you not to interfere earlier, it might have sounded harsh. But one of the main reasons I said that is because I don't ever want to see you get hurt. If Kakashi hadn't stopped me and Sasuke, that could have been you caught in the middle of those attacks. I don't know what I would do if I ever hurt you." The last part came out as a whisper, although Sakura had just managed to hear it. Sakura gave a silent nod to show that she understood, then smiled and whispered, "Apology accepted." "Thanks," Naruto replied, wearing his first smile since the incident. It was a small smile, but there, nonetheless. "So, what were you gonna tell me?" Sakura walked a little farther before the question registered with her. All at once, her eyes dropped a bit, and what seemed to be a wave of sadness washed over her visage. After a while, the first words she spoke were his name. "Sasuke-kun." "Ah," Naruto said, sighing a bit. "Him. I'm sorry," she said, dropping her head. "I didn't mean to." "It's okay," Naruto replied, but if he was honest with himself, it really wasn't. When she had invited him on this date, he thought that maybe she was pitying him. Sasuke was the one who started the hospital fight, after all. Well, it wasn't really how he would have wanted to get his first date, he would have taken it, and, if he was honest, it might have actually brightened up his day some. Unfortunately, it looked like he wasn't even that lucky. "So, what is it?" he finally asked, both hands stuffed deep in his pockets, as they walked. She paused briefly then said, "He didn't want me to tell you this. It's Orochimaru's fault." "What's Orochimaru's fault?" Sakura went on to explain how Sasuke now had some type of curse mark, and how it was affecting his mind, making him lash out in anger at random. Apparently, Orochimaru had given it to him, and offered him power if he would join him. She explained that she and Kakashi were on a short list of people who knew about it, and that Kakashi had tried to reassure her that everything would be okay. Naruto could see that she wasn't convinced. She was worried. Deeply worried. Probably even more so after seeing Sasuke lash out again today. After a moment of silence, Naruto looked ahead and said, "Orochimaru, huh?" Sakura's response was a dejected but clear nod. "I saw him." Sakura's head swiveled towards him, her pink hair swaying from the sudden jerk of movement, as emerald green eyes came to rest on Naruto's face. "Orochimaru." "Yeah," Naruto replied. "He fought Granny Tsunade and Pervy Sage." After thinking back to the adrenaline-pumping encounter for a bit, he whispered, "He's really strong." Sakura turned away slowly, choosing to refocus her attention on the ground in front of her toes. "So, it is true," she whispered. "Orochimaru does have a lot to offer." One glance at her face was all Naruto needed to see that she was more bothered than she was letting on. The pale face, the nearly lifeless green eyes, the persistent self-hug she had started giving herself. Her face betrayed her, and screamed everything she was trying to hide. From how she had spoken about things, she made it sound like she was just worried about Sasuke, but it wasn't just worry, it was fear. She was scared. Scared that Sasuke would take up Orochimaru on his offer that she'd lose him. After a while, Naruto let out a small smile, deciding to do the only thing he felt he could do. "Cheer up, Sakura-chan," he said, gently nudging her side with his elbow, and grinning a sort of cheesy grin. "Sasuke would never join that creep." "Do you really think so?" she asked, now turning to face him with skeptical eyes. "Yeah." Naruto shrugged. "I mean, Sasuke is plenty strong. He doesn't need to go to some weird snake guy to try to get stronger. Don't let it worry you, okay?" At first, she didn't seem convinced, but Naruto could see the cogs turning in her mind, as she stared up into the faintly orange sky. She was obviously engaging in some Shikamaru-level thinking, but despite the mental hoops her mind was going through, she managed a silent, "Thank you." It was the first time he saw her smile since the hospital. It was nice. Allowing himself a faint smile of his own, he softly replied, "Don't mention it." Sakura watched, as the top half of the sun peered from behind the Hokage monument, and painted the village in a brilliant yellow hue. The sky was a fading orange color now, although a small part of it had already transitioned into a deep blue, signaling the coming night. The wonderful sunset always made her feel a sense of serenity and calm, but seeing the state Naruto was in had the opposite effect. His usually vibrant blue eyes had taken on an icy shade of blue, and he was much quieter than usual. Every now and then, she would say something to try to make conversation, but all she got from him were a few words here or a small smile there. Eventually, the two of them fell into a sort of agreed-upon silence. As far as dates went, this one was going pretty rough, although she did suppose part of it was her fault. Bringing up Sasuke in such a straightforward way was a bonehead move given what had happened earlier, and any sensible person would have probably used a different approach, but once again, she had let her emotions get the best of her. She was wondering what she could do to cheer him up when she spotted Ichiraku looming in the distance, its red and white drapes flapping in the wind. Aha. But she didn't know anything about Naruto Uzumaki. She knew he was a ramen-loving fool. Smiling, she turned towards him and said, "Hey, wanna grab some Ichirakus? I did say it was a date, after all." The question lingered in the air for a few seconds before Naruto's head jolted up, recognizing that he had been spoken to. "Huh. You're not a very good dating partner," she said, crossing her arms teasingly. A soft smile graced Naruto's lips as he scratched the back of his neck nervously. "Sorry, Sakura-chan. Just had a lot on my mind with everything that's happened today." She uncrossed her arms, dropping her feigned anger. "Are you sure you're okay?" she asked. Naruto wore a small smile as his eyes settled on the ground. A few steps later, he looked forward and said, Yeah, I'm fine, Sakura-chan." Sakura examined him for a bit, then decided not to push things any further than that. It had been a rough day, so it made sense for him to still be reeling. Maybe he just needed some time to bounce back. They all did. "So," she said, nudging him a bit, "I was actually asking you if you wanted to get some ramen. I know I had kinda said this was a date, so it only seems fair." Tucci and Ayam were already waving at the two to come on over, and Sakura could even see a small cat that had started hanging around the ramen shop a few weeks ago. It came and curled between Naruto's legs affectionately, as if to extend her invitation as well. She had a gray and black striped pattern coating her fur, and looked to be pretty well fed by the looks of it. She looked like she was in between being a cat and a kitten. A true kitty cat. "You greedy furball," Naruto whispered, picking her up gently. "You just want me to drop you some food, don't you?" Sakura giggled at that. "Well," she prodded. "What do you say? Even the cat wants you to stay." She watched him eye the half-cat, half-kitten affectionately, as his hand softly stroked the coarse fur. The thought of staying seemed to cross his mind, but not for very long. He gave the ramen shop one last look over, then gently sat down the kitten, and said, "Nah, not today." Sakura propped both hands on her hips, and half yelled, "You don't want ramen." The way she said it made it sound more like a surprised accusation than a question. "Not today, Sakura-chan." Sakura was not buying it. With an accusing eyebrow raised high, she said, "Come on, Naruto. You can't tell me you're seriously considering leaving with ramen in the equation." "Sorry, Sakura-chan. I just don't feel like eating right now." "But what about the date?" she asked, confident that her little reminder would make him stay. She could tell that Naruto had tried to force a smile, but it was even less convincing than the ones he tried before. "Don't take it personally, Sakura-chan. It's been a long day. I just want to go home." "Oh," Sakura replied, blinking back her shock at his statement. She was sure that a reminder of this being a date would make him stay, but it hadn't even fazed him. This side of him was so uncommon. Usually, he was so full of energy, but now, he just looked so drained. After a drawn-out silence between the two, an awkward smile settled on Sakura's lips, as she half raised her hand to wave goodbye. "Okay. I guess I'll see you around then." "Yeah," Naruto replied, nodding slightly. He then gave Tucci and Ayam a small wave, as he turned to leave. The kitten tried to follow him, curling around his legs once more, but he just patted her head smoothly before motioning for her to go back to the ramen shop. Instead, she sat in place for what seemed like an eternity, watching him walk away through the thin black slits in her yellow eyes. "What happened?" asked Tucci, as he, Sakura, and Ayam watched Naruto's back disappear into the bustling afternoon crowd. Sakura's elbow came to rest on the ramen bar, as she placed her head in the palm of her hand, and barely breathed a lot. Naruto snaked his way through the dense crowd with both hands burrowed deep into his pockets. His eyes were tired. Haki even felt like his eyelids were tired, but he still had just enough strength to lift them up to scan the village surroundings. The village was remarkably different at night. It bustled with a different type of life, the nightlife. Businesses lined each side of the street, content to simply serve their customers and make them happy. Restaurants bathed customers in warm yellow lights to set a more mellow mood, and small knick-knack shops seemed to employ warm lights to better advertise their products. There was even a faint smell of grilled meat in the air, possibly from that barbecue restaurant Shoji liked. It was a relaxing atmosphere all in all, so relaxing that Naruto almost forgot about his present troubles. Almost. That is until he was greeted by a deep raspy voice resonating in the corridors of his mind. There was a small chuckle followed by a noticeable pause, and then the voice came like a purr in the night. Naruto Uzumaki turned down ramen and a date with his precious Sakura-chan, all in one day. I guess hell must have froze over recently. Great. Just what he needed. Something else to sour the day for him, as if it wasn't already crappy enough. Any chance he had at cheering up disappeared after hearing the fox's comment, and all he could find the strength to do was mumble. "Just leave me alone. I see you've still got some attitude left." "Nice." Naruto decided not to respond, and instead kept trudging along. Maybe the fox would leave him alone that way. "So, you're just going to ignore me? Not very good manners." Naruto raised a hand to massage his temple. "You know, I just wanted to be alone for a bit." You think you can do that, huh? Maybe just shut up. For, like, 3 seconds. Okay, 1 2 3. The fox replied with a sickening chuckle. I'm back. Naruto shut both eyes to take a moment, then opened them after he had cooled off a bit. I hate you, he whispered, reaching for his apartment door. Hate me? The fox laughed. Hating me is the same as hating yourself. We're both jumbled up in here, remember? Naruto remained silent and stepped inside, deciding to ignore the overgrown orange hairball. The fox might have said something else, but Naruto didn't hear it. He just fell into a daze of sorts. With a toss, his apartment key slid onto his coffee table, then he started his lazy trek towards his bedroom. The door let out a high-pitched squeak as he pulled it open, and upon examining the room, he noticed that everything was just like it usually was. There was his unmade bed with the sheets tossed randomly to the side, his alarm clock with its broken alarm, his frog-shaped wallet spilling out some pocket change, and the smell of instant ramen cooked into the walls. Everything being in its proper place was actually a plus, since other kids would sometimes break into his house and mess with stuff for no good reason. He always told himself that they were just stupid, or maybe misguided. Yep. Just a bunch of stupid misguided kids. The fox laughed. Misguided? Really, kid? What about all of those grown men who don't let you eat at their restaurants? Are they misguided too? Shut up. It's the truth though. No, it's not. Stop lying to yourself. I never lie to myself. Ha, liar. That's another lie right there. You should be careful about that. The strongest lies are the lies you tell yourself you know. Naruto let out a steadying breath as both eyes involuntarily looked towards the ceiling. Thank you, old wise one, he mumbled, walking over to his bed. You're very welcome. If you want, there's more advice where that came from. Naruto raised both hands to his head, sweeping them across his face dramatically, as he plopped down onto the bed. Can you please just shut up? Truth hurts, doesn't it? Naruto's eyes fell shut on their own. The only thing that hurts is having to hear your ashy voice when I'm already having a bad day. That's nice, I like it. But you're still not fooling me. I know that you can't seriously believe all of those villagers are just misguided, as you put it. That would just make you even more of a naive fool than I took you for. Yes, I'm a naive fool then. I'm not buying it. You should actually take my disbelief as a compliment. It means I don't think you're stupid enough to actually believe what you just said. What do you want me to do? Say I'm honored. Nah, I just want you to acknowledge the facts. These villagers hate you, and if there's one thing I've learned in my many years, it's that history is the best way to predict future behavior. If they hate you now, then they're always gonna hate you. The feeling that could only be described as boiling rage coursed through Naruto's veins before he jolted upright on his bed. Closing his eyes in a split moment of concentration, he opened them to find himself exactly where he intended to be in the fox's chamber. The darkness of the chamber was thick and seemed to choke the air, same as always. But through the darkness, and into that cursed chamber, Naruto could see the darkened silhouette of the fox. Blood-red eyes peered back at him, and a twisted grin could be faintly seen revealing rows of sharp canines. In the past, he had felt fear at the sight, but now it was something else entirely. Not when I'm Hokage, he retorted, eyes flashing with rage. After that statement, Naruto heard the loudest cackle of laughter he had ever heard from the fox in his life, and watched as the fox threw his head back in ecstasy. Another fit of laughter followed. You'll be lucky to make it to Chunin. Pausing, then swallowing a bit at the fox's reaction, Naruto replied, what are you talking about? Kid, they only promote one ninja each exam, and I highly doubt they'll pass you anytime soon. How much formal training did you have before the academy? 0. The best sensei you've ever had is Jiraiya, and he's running off being a pervert half the time. If you still think you've got a chance at being Hokage, you're way more of a fool than I took you for. Well, I'm just about as strong as Sasuke is now, he stammered. So I like my chances. Yeah, you're right, the fox acknowledged, nodding. You might even be stronger than him at the moment, but despite that fact, everyone still treats you the same, don't they? Interesting, isn't it? Naruto stood staring at the fox for a few moments, then turned away with furrowed eyebrows. I'm done listening to you. Come on. Don't run away. The fox whined sarcastically, grinning in glee. You know, on second thought, maybe you should. He quickly stalked up to the edge of the cage, revealing mounds of orange fur in the process. Come on, he purred. I know you've considered it before. Just pack up your things, and leave. Yeah, leave, and go where? Naruto replied, his voice slightly shaky. Some other village where people will hate me. No thanks, I've got enough problems, as it is. Who said anything about going to another village? That won't solve any of your problems. What you need, the fox continued while wagging a finger, is someone who can help you tap into your true potential. And who's that? The fox's bloodshot eyes narrowed, and his mouth formed a disturbing grin that Naruto couldn't bring himself to trust. You can't be serious. Why not? The fox responded. I've learned a great deal in my time on this earth, all valuable lessons that I could pass on to you. I'm not listening to this, Naruto said, scoffing into his shoulder. Think about it. The fox said, an aggressive undertone lining his voice. Not only would you have someone training you full-time, but you'd have the added bonus of access to my power. In the past, you've had to wrestle me for my power in dire situations. Imagine if I gave it to you willingly. Stop it, Naruto said, two fingers moving up to pinch the bridge of his nose. Knew the fox purred, grinning a grin that screamed ill intent. I will not be ignored, boy. People have taught you to fear my power. I could teach you to control it, wield it, maybe even master it. I'm not hearing this, he said, using his hands to cover both ears. You could leave and train somewhere far from here. Become stronger than they could possibly imagine. Stop. The cry echoed off the walls of Naruto's mind and slowly faded until there was nothing left but bone-chilling silence. A few moments later, the fox took a very calm step back from the iron bars and said, or you could stay here and roll the dice. Who knows, maybe you leave and make Chunin one day. As the fox's last statement reached Naruto's ears, he found that his body had gone rigid, paralyzed by the small part of him wondering about the truth in the fox's words. It was a while until he started to regain the functionality in his limbs. Each finger twitched gently as the blood began to circulate again. As the feeling returned to his hands, he turned them over to look into his palms. After a while, he balled them up into angry fists. Traitors. They couldn't block out any of the fox's cutting words, nor could they lessen the impact they had. His thoughts were interrupted by a strange hissing sound coming from outside. The strange hiss rang through the walls of the apartment, jerking him back to the real world unapologetically. Tiredly, he raised a hand to massage his neck as he got up to investigate. Always something, he grumbled. As he neared the door, the hissing sound stopped and was replaced by a rapid back and forth clicking sound. A low growl escaped his throat and his fists clenched as he reached for his front door, shaking with renewed anger. Now he knew what it was. You jerks, he yelled, yanking his front door open. The trio of masked genin looked like they'd been caught with their hands in the cookie jar. Oh, shoot. One of them exclaimed. He's home. The three cut their tails and ran away in a flurry, with one of them taking a small tumble as he leaped from the doorstep. That's what you get, you turd, Naruto yelled as the clumsy schoolboy recovered from his unscheduled appointment with the ground. After the group had disappeared into the village, Naruto's eyes darted across the ground, spotting an abandoned spray paint can. Fresh blue paint lined the spray tip, and one glance at his door revealed that the group had already done a little spraying before he caught them. A low growl escaped his throat as he snatched up the can, chucking it in the direction they had run off in. And take this with you, he yelled. The can flew less than 30 feet and landed on the ground with a clank, rolling sideways for a bit before coming to a stop. Turning away, he walked back into the apartment and slammed the door shut behind him, muscles tensing uncontrollably. An empty ramen cup was unfortunate enough to be left lying on the ground and quickly met his foot as he kicked it across the room with a frustrated yell. Why is there always something? I thought stupid pranks like this stopped at the academy. His chest rose and fell in between words. If it isn't trouble with the team, it's dealing with those jerks. Yep, the fox laughed. And if it isn't having to deal with those jerks, it's having to deal with them. The fox's laughter reverberated in Naruto's mind, but there was no laughter on Naruto's part. He just stood there, shaking. A moment later, he turned towards his room with a snarl, snatching up any item unfortunate enough to be in his reach. Without warning, his alarm clock was chucked across the room and sent crashing into the wall. A distinct lightning-shaped crack split the frame, and a piece of the silver bell was sent splintering off at some odd angle skywards. Good. His frog-shaped wallet was the next victim, a sweaty paint-stained palm reaching out and grabbing it furiously. The wallet turned into a green blur as a baseball toss sent it speeding towards the wall and crashing into it with a clank. The green pouch fell to the wooden floor dramatically, freeing up various currencies to roll about. Books, scrolls, clothes, all violently thrown in an attempt to bury the pain. But it wouldn't go away. Tears soon wet the sides of his cheeks, as every throw grew more erratic than the last. Why isn't it helping? That's not gonna change anything, the fox said in between throws. Shut up, Naruto yelled, tightening his grip on the next object in his rampage. It was only after throwing it that he realized what it was. The picture of Team 7 spun towards the wall and hit it with a decided crack before falling face down on the floor. Concern slowly replaced the rage in Naruto's eyes as he stood frozen. With a frantic step forward, he quickly made his way over to the downed item, repeated echoes of no, leaving his lips. All he could do was hope it wasn't broken, but, as he flipped the picture around in his hands, he saw that the damage had already been done. A spiderweb-like crack started at the bottom corner of the frame, and ran up the entirety of the picture. Kakashi and Sakura were unevenly split by the fracture, while he and Sasuke stood resolutely on different sides. Still wet eyes squinted to examine the damage, as he ran a finger along the cracks that had formed. It was ruined. The picture stared back at him mockingly. His so-called family was broken. Slowly, his body came to rest on the floor next to his bed with both arms curling round his knees weakly. Deep crinkles formed around his eyes as he tried to squeeze them shut, eventually grimacing in an attempt to stop the tears, but he couldn't, not this time. It was then that he felt that heavy feeling weighing down his chest again. That heavy sense of despair he couldn't escape, as a child. That pain that was always trying to claw its way into his soul. By the end of the night, he wondered if it would have its way. Both arms wrapped around his form a bit tighter, as the thought haunted his very being. The tears fell not long after, each one carrying the weight of 1,000 sorrows. He wanted so desperately to act like everything was okay, like the day hadn't happened, like his life hadn't happened, but it did, and there came a point where he could no longer ignore the pain. Is this what I'm meant to be? If the coming night was any indication of the answer to that question, the universe had a good sense of humor. The words had barely left his lips when a stroke of moonlight passed through the curtain, slowly painting the room in dim grayscale. It was unclear whether he felt anything while watching his room transform into a shadow of his former self, but if he did, he didn't show it. He simply sat there, motionless. The only thing to ever affect the slightest change in his features was when he noticed how at home Kakashi's hair looked. All a matter of perspective. A small part of him wanted to turn on the lights, to chase away the darkness, but he ignored it, and sat there. He would much rather stop these stupid tears instead, but he knew better. He had learned long ago that trying to stop the tears just made it worse, much worse. But still, with how long the tears had been falling, he wondered would there ever be an end. He got his answer after about half an hour or so, but by that time he didn't care to stop anymore. The spot at the feet of his bed was comfortable by now, so he decided to stay there, eventually losing track of time in the process. The time for supper came and passed, but he didn't feel like moving, so he didn't. If he was honest, he could probably sit there until morning with no problem, and just sleep the night away. The idea was tempting, but he cursed himself for knowing that it wouldn't change anything. His eyes slowly scanned the recently upturned room, bringing a small frown to his face, as he realized he'd probably have to clean it all up eventually. What time was it anyway? His eyes skeeted the floor looking for his alarm clock, but upon spotting it, he realized it was broken, stuck with the ticker trying to flick past the time it had been when it crashed into the wall. Great. Just great. Sighing, he looked towards the broken picture lying on his floor, and gently lifted it to his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was dry and tired. Bet you think I'm a wimp, don't you, Fox? There was a dragging silence before an overly long yawn was heard from the confines of the fox's chamber. Finding a comfortable spot to rest his head on his paws, he smacked his lips 3 times, then replied, "No, just stupid." Naruto huffed, although his face barely changed from its hardened expression. "Figures," he replied. "At least I can always count on you to speak your mind. Makes talking to you a whole lot more interesting. Thought you didn't like hearing me talk. Something about my ashy voice." "Yeah, I did say that, didn't I?" He gave a lifeless shrug, and continued, "Guess talking to you is better than not talking to anybody. And you're a bit easier to talk to since we're both," he waved a hand absent-mindedly, "jumbled up in here, as you put it." "Yeah," the fox replied. "Guess that makes sense." A few moments later, Naruto glanced around his upturned room. He felt tired suddenly. Or maybe he had been feeling that way all night. He was too confused to remember anymore. Looking back down into his lap, he whispered, "I'm sitting in the middle of my room, in the middle of the night, talking to a giant orange fox. I must be losing my mind. Half the people in this village are." The fox said in a matter-of-factly tone. "Just look at your team." "Yeah, I guess you're right." The following silence was drawn out, but strangely comfortable, much like the silence one enjoys when going out into an open field. It was peaceful, mellow, quiet. "Hey Fox." "What?" There was a brief pause, then Naruto asked the question that had been haunting him for a good portion of the night. "Do you really think I'll never become Hokage?" Silence preceded the answer, and it left Naruto feeling empty inside. Almost like he didn't have anything of substance left in him, just dry bones and bare flesh. The part of him wished it was fear of the answer that had seized his soul, but he wasn't afraid of the answer, he was afraid that he already knew it. "No?" the fox replied bluntly. "From my experience, a Hokage is usually elected by the people because they trust that person." Naruto's eyes narrowed, creasing the skin in between his eyebrows. "And they hate me." "Yeah," the fox replied, pausing. "But the Hokage is also usually the strongest ninja around, as well, so leaving, and getting stronger, couldn't hurt your chances. Maybe when they see you're stronger, they'll come around." "Do you really think so?" Naruto asked, although there wasn't much life left in his voice. "Maybe." There was a noticeable pause, as Naruto considered the proposition, but after a while, he just shook his head disapprovingly. "It's a nice thought, Fox, but we'd be caught before we made it past the wall. Not if we did things my way." "And what's your way?" A low chuckle escaped the fox's throat as he straightened up in his cage. "Come in here," he said. Naruto shut his eyes and opened them, standing in front of the iron prison he was growing more and more accustomed to seeing. Through the darkness, he could see the fox leaning forward. First, he purred, tail slowly wagging in the background. "I have to know if you're in or out. I can't be undecided." "Nope." The fox replied, rows of canines showing, as he grinned from ear to ear. Naruto lifted his head up to look into the fox's eyes, as the storm began to brew within himself. Could he really risk everything he had in Konoha to run off in the vague hope of getting stronger? The thought seemed crazy, but strangely alluring. It was a new adventure. No pesky villagers. No annoying genin. No one to tell him what he should do. Just him, and the fox couldn't forget that important bit of information. Look, the fox said, leaning forward a bit more. Just ask yourself this. When you're old and gray, do you want to look back and think about what could have been if you had taken a chance? Or his lips parted, revealing a sly grin. Do you want to say you had the guts to partner with the nine-tailed fox? Naruto remained silent, as he lowered his gaze down into the murky water splashing up the sides of his feet. His reflection moved with the ripples in the water, and stared back at him. He hoped it would have an answer that it would tell him what to do, but it didn't. It was just as clueless as he was, and he was left not knowing what to think. But maybe that was the problem. He thought about things too much. He was no Shikamaru, it was about time he stopped pretending to be one. Thinking was overrated anyway. Lifting his eyes from the water, he shook his head and said, "We're not gonna get 2 miles, fox. Are you in?" Deep blue met blood red, as the desperate young boy and the cunning old fox stared at each other, Naruto standing with arms crossed, the fox sitting on his back paws. The iron bars separating the two seemed to fade into the background as they stared, unblinking, unmoving, and just a tad bit untrusting. Naruto was the first to blink as he turned away. "Alright," he shrugged. "Let's see what you got." The fox grinned, showing his jagged rows of teeth once more. "Very good," he purred. "Alright, stop being so creepy," Naruto replied, finding the fox's face quite disturbing to look at. "What's in it for you?" "Who, me?" the fox asked, making an innocent face as he raised a paw to his chest. "Yeah, you." Tilting his head upwards, the fox scratched his chin. "Well, if I'm honest, there isn't really much in it for me. I'm just an old fox, but if I can help Konoha lose its precious Jinchuriki, I would feel a lot better." "Jinchuriki?" Naruto asked. "Yeah, Jinchuriki," the fox replied. "That's what people who have tailed beasts living in them are called. That's why everyone hates you, why they can't trust you. Because you've got me." "Well, thanks, you've really brightened up my life." "Hey, don't blame me, kid. I didn't ask to get trapped in here." "Trapped? What are you talking about?" The fox paused briefly, then gave a low chuckle that shook the chamber as he leaned forward. "Kid, do you really think you were just born with me?" Naruto's eyes widened ever so slightly as he stepped closer to the iron bars. "What are you talking about?" Another grin crept onto the fox's lips. "We have a lot of questions, don't we? Do you have answers?" "Maybe," the fox said, grinning and giving a slight shrug. "But don't worry, they'll be answered in time." "I want an answer now." "Well, too bad," the fox said, tilting his head. "If I told you everything up front, you'd probably toss me to the side as soon as you didn't need me anymore. Believe it or not, I'm not like you. I don't just use people." "Neither do I," the fox chuckled. "I just protect my own interests, which is something you should also learn to do." Scoffing, Naruto turned away. "Fine," he muttered. "But eventually, you're going to tell me what you know." "Of course," the fox said, rubbing his nose. "A deal's a deal. But for now, we have to get ready." "Get ready for what?" "Tonight," the fox grinned. "We make our move." Thanks for watching my video. Leave a like if you enjoyed my video, and also do consider subscribing to my channel for more awesome content. See you next time, till then sayonara.